Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Adweek webinar, where we will be looking at ROI today versus brand growth tomorrow, examining how Nationwide has used advanced analytics to get the best of both. And today's webinar is being brought to you in association with Neustar. I'm Stuart Feil, Custom Publishing Director of Adweek, and I will be your host for today's event. Before we begin, I just want to go over a few things about the webinar platform, as well as some of the logistics of today's webinar. The formal presentation today should go somewhere in the 35 to 40-minute range. Afterwards, we will have plenty of time for audience Q&A. So if at any time you have a question for today's speakers, just simply use the Q&A tool, which you'll see on the left-hand side of your webinar screen. So ask your questions at any time, and we will try to get to them when we are all done. And if we don't have time to get to your question, we always make sure that they get forwarded to the speakers, so they will always have a chance to get back to you offline. We are supporting social sharing on today's webinar. You'll see the hashtag we're using there on the bottom right of the opening slide. It's hashtag AdweekNewstar. So if you are out there on Twitter or you're out there on any other social channels, just give us a shout out, let us know you're in the audience and that you're joining us today. We'll also be tweeting out some things from the webinar via social, so be a part of the conversation. You can also follow along with that hashtag. You'll notice there's a tab at the top of your screen marked Twitter. You can see what comes out along that hashtag that way and be part of the conversation. It's not too late to invite your colleagues to join us today. Everyone should have gotten a confirmation email and a reminder email probably about 15 minutes ago, just letting you know that everything was getting started. In there you'll find a link over to the registration page, so feel free to share that with your colleagues. Let them join us today, and if they can't join us live, the webinar, of course, is being recorded and will be available on demand later this afternoon, so they can always check the on-demand version today. Lastly, if you want a copy of today's slide presentation, you'll see a Resources tab at the top of your screen. You'll find in there a PDF of today's slides, so feel free to download those, share those with your colleagues as well. Finally, if you enjoy today's webinar and you want to stay up to date on what else Adweek has coming down the pike, check out the Adweek webinar calendar at www.adweek.com/webinars. Follow us on Twitter at AWWebinars, and we'll keep you up to date on what we have coming up. Let me just take a moment here and introduce today's speakers. Since, of course, we've mentioned Nationwide, we mentioned Neustar, we've got representatives of both. We're very happy to be joined first off from Neustar by Joe Pagano, who is the Senior Director of Advisory Services there, and he's responsible for delivery, client adoption, and change management across Neustar's full range of marketing solutions. We're also very happy to be joined by Brian Jones, who is the Director of Data Science, Modeling, and Forecasting over at Nationwide, real expert in the areas of analytics, and he leads the analytic efforts at Nationwide that include things like marketing mix modeling, et cetera. And these are some of the things that he and Joe will be talking about later on today. So let me, without further ado, pass this over to Joe for today's presentation.
Great. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Adweek, for helping us organize this, and thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon for what we hope will be a really good discussion. Today we're going to be talking about a very big challenge that marketers face, which is how do you drive short-term ROI and deliver long-term brand growth at the same time? If you're a marketer in today's world, you've no doubt been challenged with the seemingly conflicting demands from your leadership. Grow the business, but also make sure that you wring every last cent of ROI out of your marketing budget, or else. If you've ever woken up in a cold sweat after having a recurring nightmare about this seeming paradox of why your marketing ROI continues to improve, but your sales also continue to slide as your competitors gain market share, you're not alone. A lot of the biggest brands today are finding themselves in this exact same situation and wondering why, if I'm doing everything right, why are things still going wrong? I am Joe Pagano, Senior Director from Neustar, and I am joined by Brian Jones, who leads data science and predictive modeling for Nationwide. And today we're going to be talking to you about how you can strike the right balance between these two seemingly conflicting objectives and successfully manage short-term ROI performance, while at the same time also building your brand and driving long-term growth. We'll begin the discussion with a quick overview of where most brands are today before we get into more specifics around how Nationwide has managed to have the best of both worlds. So this may come as a surprise to many, but it's the truth. Most brands have forgotten how to grow. And it isn't just me and the folks at Neustar who have noticed. Erwin Gottlieb, chairman of Group M, who was most recently inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame, has said, when the history books get written on the last 15 years, I think they will say that the lack of brand building, the lack of effort on long-term marketing, destroyed and damaged more brand value than anyone can add up. That's a pretty harsh critique for us as marketers. But why should you listen to the opinion of just two guys, especially when one of those guys is some senior director from Neustar who you probably never heard of before today? Well, besides our opinions, there's also a lot of data to back this up. A 2015 study by Catalina found the following. 62 out of the top 100 packaged goods brands had declining sales trends. This actually equates to these big brands having lost over $18 billion in market share over the past 5 years. That's a lot of money, and I'm sure not a number that anyone on this webinar would care to explain to their CEO, CFO, or board of directors. The same study found that 9 out of 10 brands were losing market share consistently in stable categories. IRI and BCG found similar results amongst large CPG companies with sales over $5 billion annually. These very large companies collectively were losing 2 points of market share every year between 2009 to 2014, with the top 10 companies in this sector having lost 4% of their market share over the last 5 years. Similar research from Bain found that amongst insurance companies, many were experiencing customer churn as high as 25% every year. One of the root causes identified in the study was a pervasive focus on increased acquisition at continually decreasing costs. Essentially, insurance companies were racing each other to the bottom and buying the worst customers from each other year after year after year. Examples like the ones we've just covered are probably why a recent Forrester survey found that increasing marketing performance was the #1 driver behind the role that analytics play in organizations. Marketers are beginning to prioritize analytics as a lever to improve business performance. Consequently, a recent survey of CMOs found that they expect to increase analytics budgets by almost 400% over the next 3 years. That's a huge increase over baseline and probably not enough. Seems that brands today are realizing that business growth comes from making smart decisions and that analytics can help drive smarter marketing decisions. But just spending more money on analytics isn't the answer, because analytics for analytics' sake never helped anyone reverse a negative trend or increase market share. It sounds fairly obvious, but then why have so many brands gone wrong? A major part of the answer is something called short-termism. And no, this isn't my word. It's actually something I first read in an interview with WPP's Sir Martin Sorrell, and I think he's hit the nail right on the head. In a world where every business leader has to make the next quarterly earnings report and every brand faces a new challenge every day, whether that be a constantly changing media landscape, a new competitor or disruptor in their space, or whatever the crisis of the day is, it's very difficult not to lose sight of the big picture when you have problems you need to solve today. Quoting Sir Martin, when you become more focused on the short term than the long term, you need to narrow your marketing funnel because that's where long-term effect happens. You start to focus on short-term ROI, and brand building doesn't give you short-term return. It gives you long-term return. Summed up pretty nicely, long-term brand building doesn't necessarily pay back in the short terms. So many brands ignore it in favor of the more immediate wins that come from managing their business in 13-week-long sprints. Short-termism isn't a new concept. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the saying, stepping over dollars to pick up dimes, or something similar, or one of the variations that gets to the same theme. Well, that's exactly what many brands are doing today with their maniacal focus on short-term gains without paying attention to longer-term business growth. If marketers today are going to reverse this trend and they're going to use analytics to help them, we first need to level set what exactly it is that those analytics should be looking at. In general, most marketing decisions can be boiled down into two key areas: strategic high-level decisions, such as how much of my business is marketing-driven and how can I drive growth and improvement, and more tactical short-term decisions like what can I change today to increase impact and drive a better ROI. But regardless of the type of decision you're trying to make, there are also external factors that must be accounted for in order for you to feel confident that you're making the best decision possible with the information and data available. Any marketing analytics practice, in order to be successful at driving short-term ROI and long-term growth, must be able to address both strategic and tactical needs, and be able to account for those things that are going on in the world around us that are outside of our control. Without these three necessary components, our analytics will be flawed, our ROIs will be inaccurate, and our insights will be limited. So now's probably a good point for me to take a breath and for us to hear from Brian, who I think you're all more interested in hearing from today, about the types of things that Nationwide has been doing to drive short and long-term business performance in their efforts to defeat short-termism. So first, Brian, if you don't mind, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and what your team does at Nationwide. Did we lose Brian? Are you still on?
I apologize. I'm the guy who put the mute button on. So sorry about that. Big thank you to Adweek and Neustar for hosting today's event, as well as everyone who dialed in. We really appreciate the opportunity to tell Nationwide's story and hopefully provide value to the audience. Quick rundown of my work. I do lead a data science team here at Nationwide. We are responsible for improving different aspects of the business, and we work within a larger insights and analytics group here that covers things across the enterprise. One of my team's top focuses right now is to grow and retain members by getting the most out of our marketing investment. And this includes using tools like marketing mix modeling, digital attribution, or multi-touch attribution. And basically, what we eventually got to was a unified attribution system.
Great. Thank you, Brian. So can you tell us a little bit more about Nationwide, since a lot of folks have probably heard of you. I think we've all seen Peyton Manning singing the jingle. But one of the things people probably think of Nationwide the most is a Midwestern auto insurer. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Nationwide's business is today and where they've been?
Sure, Joe. And to your point, I think that is how a lot of people do think of us when they think of Nationwide. If we can cover this from maybe two different viewpoints. The first, if we just look at the overall business from the enterprise perspective, we are more than an insurance company. We are more than offering auto and home insurance. And actually, I think a lot of people might know of our Nationwide is on your side jingle, and maybe even Peyton Manning, as you had said. But I think what we're really focused on, and I think what a lot of people have learned or are learning, is that, one, to your point you mentioned earlier, we are actually one of those brands that we are growing. We've grown since 2012 and well beyond. If you look at our annual report, we are a Fortune 100 company and have been for a very long time. We're a great place to work. Fortune magazine recognizes us as a top 100 place to work for the third year in a row. And then, of course, we invest heavily in our community, sincerely, millions and millions of dollars in Nationwide Children's Hospital, preventing child accidents, et cetera. But if we go from our business standpoint, we actually are really focused on two things with our members. The first is protecting members across their life, not just auto and home. So this includes a complete array of offering, auto, home, motorcycle insurance, umbrella, life insurance, and even if you're a small business or a large business, farm, commercial, we will help you with all that. And then the other aspect is really helping people save and grow. So that's where Nationwide Bank and Nationwide Financial comes in. So whether it be a checking and savings account, a mortgage, a home loan, or an annuity or a mutual fund or retirement plan, Nationwide is there for all your sides. And when you see the ads with Brad Paisley or even Leslie Odom Jr., that's what we're communicating, is that we are there for all your sides. Now, from a marketing perspective, especially being a Fortune 100 company, we obviously spend hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising, but more importantly, it's extremely competitive environment. If you look at our competitors, both on financial services, banking, and insurance, we're talking some of the big corporations in the nation, if not the world. So that's what we're dealing with. Now, when it comes to how we advertise, we have our usual suspects. So this includes television advertising across the nation, digital advertising, if you name the tactic, we probably do it, and sponsorships. But we also are always interested in pushing the envelope and understanding emerging channels and technologies. So this includes over-the-top content, so everything from like Hulu on Apple TV, or also programmatic media buying, something also too that we focus on, especially lately. So we advertise for a lot of different media, and we also have to engage our members in a couple of different sales channels. The fact of the matter is that people are looking to not just maybe do things online. Sometimes they want to talk to a person. Sometimes they want to do something through an app. And so we have those covered. We have agents in the field, people you can call. You can also call folks at our call center. And then we also have online properties, especially for self-serve, and all of our mobile apps. Again, we want to provide channels that will hit a diverse group of folks, especially as their needs change over time. So we basically have a significant marketing investment, both in channels and in media. And then we also, of course, have to invest in all the folks here at Nationwide. We're 35,000 members strong, and our analytics teams, all the way down to our call center reps and et cetera, are part of what we invest in.
Great, Brian. Thank you for that really good overview. I'm sure a lot of people on the webinar probably didn't know all of that about Nationwide. And it certainly underscores the need for a comprehensive and unified analytics program to help guide your marketing decisions, especially with all of the different ways that you're engaging with customers and that customers are engaging with you, and all of the different ways that Nationwide can choose to invest their dollars.
That's exactly right, Joe. The key word that I think you mentioned was unified. As far as having unified analytics, it's critical because that's how we run our business. When you think about like financial services, our commercial lines business, personal lines business, I mean, these are huge businesses, billions of dollars, but that's not how we manage them. The way we look to manage them is really from a member's viewpoint. A member really doesn't care about a commercial line specific offering. What they want to know is they have certain needs in their life, and how can they protect and grow those. And so that's where we come in. So if that's how we manage our business, then that's how our analytics needs to be. So we've always had this part of a culture that, one, we are analytics driven, and two, because we're member focused, we have to combine those in an appropriate fashion. Now, one thing that we're always interested in is we primarily have two goals. One of them is to make sure our members' needs are being satisfied, and the other thing is to make sure that our business needs are being addressed. If we're not in business, then we can't help our members. So by having a unified analytic approach that goes across all the lines of business, across all of our offerings, we're able to offer different things to different members at different times. What we found, of course, is that as they get and buy more of our offerings, they get to experience the value that Nationwide brings. And so when that happens, they become more satisfied, retention increases, lifetime value increases, and then our ROI on not just our marketing investment, but all of our investments, whether it be infrastructure for our call center or our people, all of that gets a more positive ROI.
Great. So, Brian, the premise of this entire webinar is that Nationwide has been successfully able to crack the code between managing short-term profitability and long-term growth simultaneously. Can you give us a little bit of insight into the evolution of the analytics and measurement program at Nationwide, and maybe share some lessons learned with the folks who've joined us today?
Sure, Joe. I can't say enough that it is a process. It's an evolution. We've made great strides. We haven't gotten to where we are overnight, and we certainly know that there is definitely room to grow. So I think that's the first thing to say is that I think if people are looking for perfection, it's going to be a missed target often, or actually always. So what we do believe where we are now, is even though that we have room to grow yet, is that we do believe we're on a path, and we do believe we have assets for the best-in-class solutions to manage our marketing investments. And when we say manage them, what we mean is that we really are after three things, I would say, and the first two kind of go together. The first one is really to understand how our marketing works. What is the impact on the business, both from an efficiency standpoint as well as an effectiveness standpoint? You can be spending a lot of money on a given tactic and driving things you can be driving a lot of sales, but if you're not efficient at it, then that's not the best scenario. So once we understand how we're doing from that viewpoint, understanding the past, then we understand how to optimize the future, and that's the other area. So that's constantly what we're trying to do. Now, while we believe we have best in class, again, I just want to say that we are continuing to look into areas that we can improve. If I can take a step back, and this is years ago, many moons ago, where we were as far as our analytic, I guess you could call it infrastructure. We had, if I were to focus on two areas, from the first area, from a tactical standpoint, we were primarily analytically focused on campaign and market tactics. So, and by that I mean from an individual sense. So, when we have like a direct mail campaign, we can use like a control group to see what the lift of that campaign was. When we looked at a digital campaign, we can use things like attribution, modeling to see how that did, but we didn't know how they work together. From a higher level viewpoint, we understood trends of our sales and like brand health consideration and trial and purchase and different aspects of our sales cycle, but we didn't understand how different tactics are driving different aspects of that sales funnel. And so what we decided is that we had a lot of things that we could leverage. For example, we had rich data, we had rich insights, but we had a very incomplete picture. So we needed to address a couple of things, and we decided to focus on three areas of opportunity. The one is to understand and improve things that are non-addressable. And by non-addressable media, I mean when you look at things like digital, you can say this person clicked on this ad and then they bought or not. But for national TV, you really don't have that, unless if you have set-top box data, which is very expensive and not prevalent right now. So we want to be able to understand and improve the impact of our non-addressable media like television. We also wanted to understand how all of our marketing tactics worked alone as well as together. So if we increase digital spend, but we decrease television spend, what's the impact? Because we know that they work together. And then the third area is that marketing does not work in a vacuum. Of course, marketing is influenced by economics. It's influenced by our distribution, our competitor spend, you name it. We had to understand how to attribute sales to those. So when it came down to those are the three opportunities that we had, and we also knew that if we solved all those and if we found a means to figure those things out, that's great. But we also knew that we had to activate on those. So not only did we have to figure those things out from an analytics side, but we had to get people to buy in and adopt our insights so we can actually change the business going forward. Great.
So you had a bunch of different analytics and you had a lot of good learnings and insights. but you identified those key areas for improvement. What did you guys at Nationwide do to actually close that gap?
Well, it really is a lot of soul searching. You really kind of have to, my personal journey with the folks here was really just identifying what we had, what we didn't have, and when it came down to, after a lot of research, if I were to pick, one particular aspect to focus on, is that we realized that we wanted two approaches really seemed to be where we wanted to focus. One of them is marketing mix modeling or media mix modeling, depending how you call it, and then also to multi-touch attribution. Now, we had some digital attribution in-house, but we knew that we wanted it to go beyond the current offering we had in-house. And then as we look more and more at these things, we realized that we can't have them working by themselves. We really want them to be integrated. They have to be unified. They have to be one. And the reason why is it really came down to three reasons. Is that one is that if you have, say, marketing mix modeling providing one set of guidance on how to go about things with your business, and then your multi-touch attribution says to go a different way, well, then you have two versions of the so-called truth. And what do? Whereas if they work together, you have more of a unified approach. They work together, and you can basically say, hey, here's what we're thinking. The second one is very similar, but slightly different. The second one is that the data used for these approaches is different. For multi-touch, you have very granular, it's high volume, high velocity data. For mix, it's by far less granular data. If those data sources are not tied together, both within the input to the models as well as being used by the models, then again, you have opportunity for a disconnect. If there's a disconnect, there's chances are the business is not going to know which way to lead, or decisions are going to be inconsistent. And then the final thing is really just how we manage our budget. If you imagine the marketing budget, millions and millions of dollars, it's a big pile of money. So you want to figure out what's the best way to optimize that. The approach that we take is, at its simplest, it's really two different things. One of them is, from a high level, looking at tactic families, so like national television, digital, sponsorships, things like that. How should we allocate money across those? Okay, but then, and that's where marketing mix comes in. But then when you look at it from a more of a tactical standpoint, once you decide I'm going to put X dollars into our digital advertising, how do you decide which web property it goes to, or when do you flight it, or what creative that you show? That's when you need the multi-touch, and and they work together. They have to work together. So we have the top, high level, and then you have the driving it down. And then what's really cool about it is you have one inform the other. So as you get more insights as to what, say, publishers are working for, like paid search, then it feeds more of the marketing mix model and vice versa.
So, Brian, this unified approach, how did you actually get there? It sounded like there were, you knew that marketing mix and attribution methodologies were where you wanted to be, but there were still some disconnects between the two that were either delaying decisions or causing decisions to be, selectively reliant on one or the other. How did you bridge that gap and get to where you are today?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm trying to think about the best way to go about doing this, about describing it, because, Joe, there's so many different aspects that came into this. So can we maybe just take a step back here? We knew that we wanted a unified model, and we knew that two major aspects of that is going to be marketing mix and MTA. But I think the chart that we have right here, the visual we have right here really describes our vision. And if you look at market level, that's kind of like the marketing mix area, more of the top down. Goes in the customer level with digital attribution, but the gray area is one of the biggest missing, pieces that we had, propensity scoring and segmentation. And what we mean by that is that we had digital attribution, but we didn't know how non-addressable media like television was impacting that digital buy. We also didn't understand a person's innate propensity to buy from us. some people talk to their neighbor and they hear about Nationwide, maybe they had a great experience, and they trial and buy from us without even maybe seeing an ad. And other people, they see 20 ads and don't. So we needed to have that be part of it. At this point, we went into a whole bunch of things about deciding, this is our goal set. This is what we're looking for. How do we go about achieving this? If you like, I can cover now how we went about actually covering it, or did you want to cover that later on?
No, I think if you can give some insight on how you got to the approach where you are today, I think it would be really valuable for all the folks on the webinar to hear what that process was and what that evolution looked like. Yeah,
it's funny because if you don't like getting your hands dirty, man, this is a bad business to be in. And so, the first thing that we decided to do, I would say, is really we decided, first of all, we got leadership to buy in that this is the approach that we want to take and that this makes sense. And if it made sense, then how do we go about doing it? So one of the first decisions we made was, do we try to build this ourselves or do we buy? And so it's one of those decisions where you really, really have to look and say, and be honest with yourself, and you have to say, do we have the capabilities, the resources, the time, the appetite for risk to do that? And we decided that we wanted to buy. We wanted to invest with other people. And so we wanted a good partner. And as you know, we ended up going with Neustar, and we're very happy with this relationship. And so when we decided that we are going to, but actually I jumped ahead. Before we got to Neustar, of course, we did a lot of kicking tires. And so from a technical standpoint, we looked at different approaches, and one of them was, what is the best methodology to go about this? Now, marketing mix modeling, while it's rather new to say like service-oriented groups, or even like insurance where you don't buy that often, it's been in consumer packaged goods for literally decades. And so if you do any research, you can see that a lot of regression methods have been used. There's other ones too. There's like agent-based one up. But from a technical standpoint, we feel pretty good that we wanted to go with a regression-based type of approach, probably like a hierarchical Bayesian, so we can use prior knowledge and we can take advantage of multi-level modeling, and we can go into that. And that's probably like a whole webinar in and of itself. So we knew that from a mix standpoint. From an MTA standpoint, we knew that we wanted to incorporate not only someone's digital attribution, but also to how it looks at their innate propensity to buy something. And then the most important point, it has to all work together. The marketing mix needs to work with the MTA. The high level needs to work with the tactical. And so that was our technical side. That's what we knew that we needed. And of course we knew that we wanted to be able to run scenarios and see the impact on cost per sales. But I think what we found more important is that we wanted to find a partner with more of the soft skills that we wanted. We wanted someone with a proven track record of delivering. And when we say proven track record, I don't mean just delivering models with good accuracy and good MAPE scores and different things like that. I mean someone who puts a focus on truly, truly, truly understanding the business and its partners, and also someone who in thick and thin is going to be there with you. And that's really where market share came in. That's really where they stood out, and that's why we decided primarily to go with them. So again, a lot of technical aspects, but really it was more of the softer, I guess, skills that we really appreciated in market share. Excuse me, I should say Neustar. So used to calling you market share, Joe.
That's all right. I still have market share business cards sitting in my laptop bag right now. So, Brian, it's obvious that Nationwide, it's an analytically driven culture, and they place a strong emphasis on fact-based decision-making, and that a lot of resources have been aligned across the enterprise, both at the executive level all the way down to the boots on the ground, the agents in the field and the folks in the call center. Tell me a little bit about, or I guess tell us a little bit about the types of decisions that you're actually making with the model and how it supports the simultaneous management of that short-term return and that longer-term brand building.
This is probably like my favorite aspect of the whole webinar, because you can talk about all the technical stuff, you can talk about all the data, and there's so much work that goes into it, but at the end of the day, really what it's all about is activating this insight. It's about using this information to improve the member experience and improve your business and to reach your goals. So we go through all this stuff where we get all these models built, and we develop models on a quarterly basis. We run them. We have a number of lines of business. We have models at the channel level. We have hundreds of models. Once we get this done, we primarily rely on, I'd say, 3 different areas that we really use these things. The first off is what I was talking about earlier, is to understand where should we be placing our money at the highest level. So this is more like a marketing mix type of exercise. This is like when you're doing the 2018 budget and you say, how much money should we put in television or digital or in this line of business or in this tactic or that? And that's where marketing mix is. And we really run 2 different types of scenarios. One is where we have a specific sales goal that we want to meet. And so we can say something like, here's our sales goal. How much would we have to increase our marketing budget? But more importantly, where would we optimize it? So while we might increase our marketing budget by maybe a couple million, we have to decide, are we reallocating that? Like, is some moving from say, digital to a new TV tactic? The other way we do it is when we have a fixed budget. So let's say that Terrence Williams, our CMO, great creative mind, very much into the sales and the financial rigor. That's part of our culture. He says, we're going to keep the budget flat. What can I expect from a sales perspective? And so what's neat about that is, while the budget might be flat, we can probably re-optimize things so that maybe money gets sent to different tactics, so he can actually either definitely keep sales flat, if not improve them. And so that's really important. So we get a lot of benefit from doing those scenarios, especially with our 2018 planning that we are in the process of. Actually started in midsummer. The second aspect is very tactical. So when you get to the point when you say you have X amount of dollars, say, in a given digital tactic or group of tactics. So let's say you want to do online video, or let's say you want to do banner ads or something like that, paid search. Which properties do you use? Do you use Google? Do you use Bing? Do you use a certain aggregator over another aggregator? How do you flight that? That's where that comes in. So we are constantly using those. We're using those much more frequently than we do the high-level things. So on a daily, weekly basis is where you're making all those tactical decisions. And then the third area, which is very important, is that when we optimize our marketing budget, we have a pile of money, and we have to be honest and say, is our money best spent on marketing aspects, or would it be worthwhile to grab some of those dollars earmarked for marketing and maybe put them into another area of the business, maybe operations, or maybe some other area that we can get a bigger return? And so that's where we run scenarios too, where we can see how that's working. That's extremely important, especially because our environment is so competitive.
Great. I think that was a really good overview of sort of the top to bottom, from the C-suite all the way down to different channel managers who are actually making decisions around publishers and different partners that you're running media with. I know you can't go into a lot of specifics. Obviously, you're in a highly competitive space, and a conservative company in general in terms of releasing different details of results. But can you at least give us some insight into how has this actually worked out for Nationwide since you've been live with your unified models?
Sure. Yeah. Joe, I would love to give you specifics. And of course, we're a financially based company, and financial rigor and our competitive nature. I just can't do that. But I would like to share as much as I can with the audience. And I think there's a couple of things I could do. Now, you just have to take me for my word on this, but cost per sale, cost per acquisition, our retention numbers, those are all improving. by getting a better handle on our marketing investment. That goes without saying. There's a lot of intangibles that we've seen. One of them is that we're making decisions faster and more consistently. Also, too, marketing leadership and business leadership in general, I think feels a lot more confident that the decisions we're making in the short term are actually not going to hurt us in the long term. It was always a constant struggle that when we focused on something, we said, let's move dollars from here to there, someone would say, that's great, but a year from now, 2 years from now, what's going to happen? Now we have tools that can estimate those scenarios and give them, they can give them a readout where people are pretty darn confident, because not only do we run those scenarios, but then we test them, like a year later, and they see that they were pretty accurate. So they feel very, very good about it. I would say that, listen, we are a financial institution. We're a Fortune 100 company. If this wasn't making sense to do this unified attribution approach, we wouldn't be doing it. Not only do we spend money on data and everything else, but we spend money on resources. We are not doing other projects because of this. We are seeing value in this. And it's not just us. We're not the only company in the nation to be doing this. If you looked, everyone from Procter & Gamble to pretty much, I would guess, all of our competitors, someone is looking to do this. You have to understand your marketing investment. It's critical for you to be successful.
Great. So, Brian, any last minute, before we turn it over to the audience for questions, what are sort of those final thoughts that you'd like to share before we get to the Q&A?
Joe, I think there's a couple of things, and actually you have a couple of them lined up here. I think one of them that's not really on here is that, it's just really important to take the time and be honest with yourself and say, what are your priorities? What do you really want to achieve? And so, we realize that of all the areas that we can invest our money, analytically, marketing-wise, or in the business operations, we chose to invest money in unified marketing analytics. And we needed we needed to know the best way to spend our money and to get to the right answer. We needed to know ways that we can confidently activate our marketing budget. So that's the first one. Just know where you're going and know what your priorities are. And then if you decide unified marketing is the way to go, realize that one of the benefits that you get is because you can get to an answer and you can really be driving the business. The other one is that we realize that, and not just us as far as the analytics team, but as far as an organization, especially senior leadership, is that you can have short-term ROI, a long-term growth. It is not one or the other. If you want to choose to do something like that and really focus on that, you can, but you can pretty much try to keep those in balance and drive things forward. So it is doable. And then also, too, I think you got to be part of a culture that is okay with iterating through things. It's not like we went off for a year in a basement somewhere in a lab and came back and said, ta-da, here's your answer. It was, quarter after quarter of saying, here is iteration 0, and, here's what we're doing. And by this way, I think we should try this experiment, or I think we should try this tactic. And people, hopping into it. Now, we don't run around. It's not like the Wild West. We knew what our risks were. We knew what the bottom side was and what the upside was. But we had a culture that was really supportive of that. So if we had to fail, we could fail quickly and then make a quick adjustment and move forward. So please don't underestimate. The technical stuff, the data stuff is all important, but it's all for naught if you don't get buy-in in an environment that's not okay with maybe taking some risks.
Great. Should we turn it over to Stuart for Q&A?
Why not? Let's actually, we're going to get to some questions in just a minute. I just want to remind the audience, if you have a question for Brian or for Joe, just simply use the Q&A tool there on your screen, and we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. But I think so we've got a few queued up, but if we don't get to your question, we will make sure that they get forwarded over to today's speakers. I just also want to remind our audience of a couple other quick things. First off, if you want a copy of today's slides, you're going to find those in the Resources tab up there at the top of your screen, so you can go up on in there and download a PDF of today's slide deck. I also want to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded, and so will be available on demand later today and for the next year or so. So check your email around 4 o'clock Eastern time today. You should get an alert letting you know that the on-demand version is available. And so head on back if you want to listen again to some of the things that that were shared today by Brian and Joe, or if you want to send your colleagues on over to doing that. So let's hop on over to some questions now. And Brian, I'm going to start with you, and we're sort of you've been discussing really sort of having that full portfolio of wide measurement and optimization programs, and clearly it's a huge organizational initiative for you must of course be a huge organization. But really, one of the questions that came up, and this came up from a few people, and that is, you've also got to get different segments of the business and of course various parts of leadership to sign off on something like this. So what was sort of the process that you went through in order to get that level of sign off, and sort of what tips could you sort of provide as people are taking this kind of initiative and moving it up the corporate ladder to sort of get that ongoing buy-in?
That's a great question. Thank you for answering that, because I personally feel, the technical, and I've said this before, hopefully I don't sound like a broken record. The technical aspects of a project like this or a program like this, it's challenging, and there's a lot going on there, like I say, the different statistical methods you're choosing. But by far, the most valuable place to spend your time on is to ensure adoption. And that's where I view this question. And I think it's not easy work. You pretty much have to have a plan. We were fortunate enough that we had a lot of people who were proponents of this approach internally, as well as far as Neustar. They had a track record of successful adoption. So the first thing we did was we put together different tactics, or I guess I should say different approaches to convince people. Some people need a business case. Here's the problem, here's the proposed solution, here's how we think it's going to pay off. Other people are more they have other concerns, they have other risks. So identify the people into two primary groups, those who are definitely on board from the get-go, and make sure that you continue to nurture those. And those who aren't on board, find out why. Have sincere conversations. This is, taking people to coffee. This is, really understanding. And you may not find out the first, second, third time. But really, it's really putting the energy forward to finding out why and how to get there. And then once you do that, then put it depends on the environment, a formal or maybe an informal plan of how you're going to beat the drum over time. You're going to give status updates. You're going to make sure that you show adoption. You're going to show results. Show people the proof in the pudding, And we got pretty lucky. We had a lot of work to do a couple years ago to convince people on this. And then especially of late, we were really blessed to have Terrence Williams, our Chief Marketing Officer, join us. He came from the sales field, and he has been with Nationwide a long time. He knew the product and the organization inside out. He knew how to get things done. He was a champion of analytics. He was a champion of financial rigor. And when he came aboard and he saw what we were trying to do, he really pushed the needle. And so we took all the efforts we did before him, we teamed them up with what he offered, and now we're really, really gaining a lot of momentum, and we continue. It's not perfect. Certainly are challenges. I'd say they're healthy challenges, though. It's good conversation, but it really just good old-fashioned work about finding out what people need to make them feel comfortable and then keep it going and just be very persistent.
Great. Got a number of questions from people out here in the audience, and I'm trying to avoid the questions which are actually like, what gave you the best ROI and things like that. Obviously, Brian, there's a lot that you can discuss, and there's a lot that I would assume that Nationwide wants to sort of keep under its hat. But maybe you and Joe can touch on one thing, and this is some questions on sort of KPIs. Since do you have a sense here of what are sort of the key KPIs that people should be looking for in long-term growth, or how might they go about doing that? Joe, maybe this is something you might want to start on, as you sort of work with companies across industries on what they're looking at, maybe just to give some people a sense of maybe the best way to get started there.
Sure, thanks, Stuart. And that's actually a great question, because the KPIs really are what the analytics is trying to describe and then ultimately drive. So making sure you settle in on what those right metrics or outcomes are up front is important. I think it's also important to note you don't need to get it right the first time. Analytics is by definition an evolution. So if you do figure out after a couple of spins of your model that you either don't have the right outcomes or you need additional outcomes, it's okay to hit reset and learn from where you were. But in general, for a client, if I were advising anybody, whether it's Nationwide or a client really in any industry, about what are those right KPIs to focus on if you're trying to look at short-term and long-term, really you want to make sure that you're sort of modeling through the funnel. So going for that upper level, consideration type metric, or brand favorability, something a little more akin to a brand health type of driver, but then actually remembering we do have to sell stuff to our customers and our prospects. For Nationwide, on the insurance side, it's sort of well laid out, because you have to quote a policy before you bind a policy. You have to start a quote online before you can complete a quote online. And there's a lot of different insights that you can learn as you look at the different results of modeling through that engagement funnel and understanding where drop-offs are happening, where people are being brought into the process, where they're exiting, who are the type of people who are actually coming out the other end and ending up converting, and then taking it a step further beyond just sales and driving tonnage, but also looking at then that customer's behavior and engagement once they're part of your franchise. So how much are they worth? What is that customer's lifetime value? Were they worth acquiring? Those are the types of things that we've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different folks at Nationwide in particular across the different types of businesses to make sure we're aligned on not only what are the KPIs that we're using to build the models and train the models against, but also how do we then translate those outcomes into something that's common across the enterprise. So there is actually an effort underway to basically standardize how people are looking at these end financial outcomes, so that everything is apples to apples and you're not just treating things as widgets, but you're treating things in terms of how many dollars do they actually bring in to Nationwide at large. So when you're managing the business, you have the ability to actually see that portfolio view and make decisions across the portfolio. I think that's crucial when you're designing any analytics capability, is making sure you have all of the different measurement points through the funnel to give you that really short-term view, but also make sure you keep your eye on that long-term payback.
Joe, just to chime in real quick, I completely agree with everything you say. It really depends on the organization. If you believe marketing drives top funnel and then it's out of their hands, then that's maybe where you want to go. But if you can truly understand the business, understand all the touch points, understand the complete life cycle, draw it up on a map, and then you might want to go with multiple measures. But I really like what Joe said. It's an evolution. Where we started focusing on and where we are today, two different places. And I just got there over time. And so it probably will continue to change.
Great. I'm just looking at the clock. We've just got a few minutes left, so I think we've got time for maybe one more question. So Brian, let me direct this one, at least get this one started with you. You talked here about looking at different vendors, some of your internal efforts, and sort of the long process of all of this, and just wondering, as people are looking at this, is there any sort of specific advice you can share for other companies that are looking to sort of accelerate their learning curve in taking on this analytics approach? Maybe one or two quick tips that you could go with there.
Sure. I think it's. I think if I were to focus on some quick ones here, would be one would be to be very honest with yourself, and that includes, I'd say, two major aspects. One of them is knowing where you want to go. So take the time to figure that out and do a gap analysis. So this is where we want to go, and then be very honest with yourself. This is where we are today. Warts and all. How do we bridge the gap? What's our top priorities? And then the second one would be, do we build it in-house or do we partner with someone? If you're going to partner with someone, put the time in to figure out your evaluation criteria. Kick the tires. Spend a lot of time doing that. And then I'd say the last one is culture. And that is be prepared to be persistent over a long time. Get an executive sponsor who can really, really push us forward with you or even a team. And remember, the whole reason why we use this is not because it's cool technology. It's not cool technology or data or whatever. We do this to activate things, to put things into production. So always keep that in mind. It's all about how to improve the business, not all the other stuff.
Great. Joe, you got a 30-second tip or two you want to share?
Well, I think just echoing Brian's sentiment that you sort of need to know where you want to be when you're designing this type of approach, because analytics for analytics' sake, it's not a checkbox. This isn't a do I have an attribution model in place, check, step 2, profit. You really do need to invest both internally and organizationally to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. Just having best-in-class analytics isn't naturally going to lead to better performance. You actually do have to take action on the models. You have to challenge the models. You have to constantly improve the models. And that's really, I think, critical. And Brian's called that out several times throughout the webinar. That's one of the things that Nationwide was really good at. They saw something, they thought it was interesting, they put it in market, they learned more, the models improved, and you sort of continue to act and learn because you're never truly optimal. The world around us is always changing, and your analytics and your tactics always need to evolve to keep up with that. So this isn't a set it and forget it type of capability. It really is something that becomes part of the fabric of not only how you make marketing decisions, but really part of how you're running your business.
Well, Joe and Brian, I want to thank you both for sharing a lot of great information. I'm sure people will be going back and listening again to your great conversation here. Again, I just want to remind our audience of a couple of things. Again, webinar has been recorded. Check your email. You'll get an announcement here when the on-demand version is available. The slides are in the resource tab up top. And lastly, of course, if you enjoyed today's webinar, check out the Adweek webinar calendar, www.adweek.com/webinars, to see what we have coming up in the future, or to check our archive of on-demand webinars. So again, thanks to our speakers today. Thanks to our audience for taking time out of your busy day. And we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming Adweek webinar.